At 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak a mother could endure. I was wrong. The text message that arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning would shatter everything I believed about family, love, and the son I'd raised with my own two hands. Mom, just wanted to let you know, you weren't invited to the baby shower. Amanda's family only. Hope you understand. 28 words that would change my life forever. But sometimes, when people show you who they really are, the best thing you can do is believe them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Nicole Patterson, and for 43 years, I called the small town of Millbrook my home. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, I'd lace up my walking shoes and take the same route through our quiet neighborhood. Past the Peterson's bakery where the smell of fresh bread always made me smile, down Maple Avenue where the old oak trees formed a canopy overhead, and back around Pine Street to my modest two-bedroom house that I'd bought after my divorce 15 years ago. Millbrook wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I knew every shopkeeper by name, every crack in the sidewalk, every story behind the houses I passed. As a retired elementary school teacher, I'd taught half the children in this town how to read, including my own son Ryan, who was now 31 and lived just 20 minutes away in the newer Willowbrook subdivision with his wife Amanda. The house on Pine Street had been my sanctuary after the divorce. Richard, my ex-husband, had left me for his secretary when Ryan was 16. A cliché so predictable it almost made me laugh if it hadn't hurt so much. But I'd rebuilt my life piece by piece. I'd thrown myself into teaching, spending countless evenings grading papers and preparing lessons that would spark curiosity in young minds. I'd volunteered at the community center, organized charity drives, and slowly but surely, I'd created a life I was proud of. Ryan had been my anchor through those difficult years. He'd stayed close to home for college, choosing State University just an hour away so he could visit on weekends. We'd developed a tradition of Sunday dinners, where he'd tell me about his classes, his dreams of becoming an engineer, his hopes for the future. Even after he graduated and landed a good job at Morrison Engineering, he'd still come by most Sundays, sometimes bringing friends, always making me feel like I mattered. That's why it had been such a shock when everything changed after he met Amanda. I first met Amanda Westfield at the Riverside Community Center during the annual summer festival 3 years ago. Ryan had been volunteering at the face painting booth, something he'd done since high school, when this petite blonde woman approached him with a complaint about the organization of the event. She worked for an event planning company in the city, she'd explained loudly enough for everyone to hear, and she could see several areas that needed improvement. Ryan had been immediately smitten. I could see it in the way his eyes lit up when she spoke, the way he hung on her every word as she critiqued everything from the placement of the food trucks to the sound system setup. Amanda was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly styled hair and an outfit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. Within 2 months, Ryan was bringing Amanda to our Sunday dinners. I'd tried so hard to like her, to see what my son saw in this woman who seemed to find fault with everything from the temperature of my pot roast to the outdated furniture in my living room. She'd sit at my dining room table, picking at her food while explaining how her family did things differently. In Connecticut, where I grew up, she'd say, my mother always used china for Sunday dinner. She said it showed respect for the family tradition. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'd glance at my everyday dishes, the ones Ryan had eaten from his entire life, and feel somehow diminished. Amanda's family, I learned, owned a chain of high-end boutiques along the East Coast. Her father was some kind of investment banker, her mother had inherited money from old Connecticut families, and she'd grown up in a world of country clubs and private schools. Everything about my middle-class life seemed to disappoint her, though she was always careful to couch her criticisms in concern for Ryan's future. Ryan deserves so much more, she'd whisper to me one Sunday while he was outside taking a phone call from work. He's so talented, so brilliant. I just want to help him reach his full potential. The implication was clear. His current life, the life I'd helped him build, wasn't good enough. The Sunday dinners became less frequent after Ryan and Amanda got engaged. He'd call with apologies. Amanda wasn't feeling well, they had plans with her friends. Her parents were visiting from Connecticut. I'd end up eating a pot roast by myself, saving leftovers that would last me the entire week, wondering where I'd gone wrong. The wedding had been a small, elegant affair at an expensive venue in the city. Amanda had chosen everything from the flowers to the music, and while Ryan had asked me what I thought about various details, it was clear that my opinions held little weight. I'd worn my best dress, a navy blue outfit I'd bought specially for the occasion, only to realize when I arrived that I was severely underdressed compared to Amanda's guests in their designer gowns and sparkling jewelry. Amanda's mother, Patricia Westfield, had made a point of introducing me to people as Ryan's mother, the schoolteacher. The way she said it made my decades of educating children sound like some quaint hobby, rather than a meaningful career. Her father, Robert, had politely asked about my little house in Millbrook, managing to make it sound like I lived in a shack, rather than a cozy home I'd worked hard to afford. During the reception, I'd sat at a table with some distant relatives while Amanda's college friends and family dominated the head table. I watched my son laugh and dance with his new wife, looking happier than I'd seen him in months, and I'd told myself that his happiness was what mattered most. If Amanda made him happy, I could learn to navigate this new dynamic. But the distance had only grown wider after the wedding. Ryan and Amanda bought a house in Willowbrook, a sprawling development of oversized homes with perfectly manicured lawns and 3-car garages. It was beautiful, I had to admit, but it felt cold and impersonal compared to the neighborhoods where families had lived for generations, where children played in yards and neighbors knew each other's names. My visits to their new home always felt awkward. Amanda would give me tours, pointing out expensive features and name-dropping the interior designer she'd hired. Everything was beige and white and pristine, with no personal touches, no family photos except their wedding pictures. When I'd suggested they might want some pictures from Ryan's childhood, Amanda had smiled tightly and said they were, quote, going for a more contemporary aesthetic. The announcement of Amanda's pregnancy 6 months ago had filled me with such joy that I'd actually cried when Ryan called to tell me. A grandchild. After years of feeling like I was losing my son, I'd thought this baby might bring us back together. I'd imagined myself babysitting, sharing stories of Ryan's childhood, being the kind of grandmother who spoiled her grandchild with homemade cookies and bedtime stories. I'd started knitting a baby blanket immediately, choosing a soft yellow yarn since they'd decided to wait to learn the baby's gender. I'd cleaned out the spare bedroom, thinking it might serve as a nursery when they visited. I'd even researched car seats and cribs, hoping Ryan might ask for my advice or let me contribute to the preparations. But as the months passed, I found myself increasingly shut out of the pregnancy experience. Amanda had morning sickness that prevented them from visiting. Then she was too tired for visitors. Then she had doctor's appointments and preparations that kept them busy. When I'd offered to throw a baby shower, Amanda had politely declined, saying her mother was handling everything. It'll just be a small gathering, she'd explained during one of our brief phone conversations. Nothing fancy. Mom has it all under control. I'd felt a pang of disappointment, but tried to understand. After all, planning events was stressful. And if Amanda's mother wanted to take the lead, I could respect that. I'd asked if there was anything I could do to help, any way I could contribute, but Amanda had assured me that everything was handled. That's why the text message on that Tuesday morning had hit me like a physical blow. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table enjoying my morning coffee and reading the Millbrook Tribune when my phone had buzzed with the notification. I'd expected it to be Linda Morrison, my closest friend since we'd taught together for 20 years. Or perhaps Carol Jenkins from next door asking about the community center's upcoming fundraiser. Instead, I'd found myself staring at 28 words that seemed to rewrite the entire story of my relationship with my son. Mom, just wanted to let you know, you weren't invited to the baby shower. Amanda's family only. Hope you understand. I'd read the message 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. Not invited. To my own grandchild's baby shower. Amanda's family only, as if I wasn't family at all, as if 31 years of loving Ryan, of supporting him through scraped knees and heartbreaks, and college applications and job interviews, counted for nothing. Hope you understand. But I didn't understand. I understood that Amanda had never particularly liked me, that she found my modest lifestyle embarrassing, that she'd rather pretend Ryan had sprung fully formed into her world without a history, or a mother who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. But I'd never imagined it would come to this, a deliberate, calculated exclusion from one of the most important celebrations of my grandchild's life. I'd sat there in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the breakfast dishes and the newspaper and the ordinary details of my morning routine, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about a baby shower. This was about my place in my son's life, about whether I would be allowed to be a grandmother to this child, about whether I would spend the rest of my life watching from the sidelines as Amanda's family claimed every important moment. The woman who'd spent 43 years in Millbrook, who'd taught hundreds of children to read, who'd rebuilt her life after divorce and created something meaningful and good, that woman deserved better than this text message dismissal. My grandchild deserved to know me, to hear stories about their father's childhood, to understand that love comes in many forms and that family isn't just about money and status and perfect houses. I'd picked up my phone to call Ryan directly, then stopped. If he'd wanted to talk to me about this, he would have called instead of sending a text. If he'd disagreed with the decision, he would have fought for me. The fact that this message had come at all told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his new life. But sometimes, when people show you exactly who they are, the best response isn't to argue or plead or try to change their minds. Sometimes the best response is to believe them and act accordingly. I'd finished my coffee, folded the newspaper neatly, and started planning what would turn out to be the most important decision of my life. Because if Amanda wanted a war over my grandchild, she was about to discover that a retired elementary school teacher from Millbrook could be a much more formidable opponent than she'd ever imagined. The first person I called was Linda Morrison. We'd taught together at Millbrook Elementary for 20 years, and she'd been my anchor through the divorce, through Ryan's teenage years, through every major crisis and celebration of my adult life. If anyone would understand the magnitude of what had just happened, it would be Linda. "Nicole, honey, what's wrong?" she asked immediately when she heard my voice. "You sound terrible." I read her the text message word for word, my voice catching on. "Hope you understand." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice tight with anger. "That little princess actually had the nerve to exclude you from your own grandchild's baby shower?" "Apparently so." I walked to my living room window, looking out at the maple tree Ryan had helped me plant when he was 12. He'd insisted we needed more shade in the front yard, and we'd spent an entire Saturday digging the hole, planting the sapling, and building a protective fence around it. Now it towered over my house, its branches reaching toward the second story. And Ryan went along with it. "Oh, sweetie." Linda's voice softened. "Have you talked to him directly about this? What would be the point? If he disagreed with Amanda's decision, he would have called me himself. The fact that he sent a text tells me everything I need to know about where his loyalties lie." Linda was quiet for a moment. "You know, I never liked that girl. From the first time you brought her to the teacher's retirement party, I could see she thought she was better than all of us. The way she looked around the community center like she was afraid she'd catch something. I remembered that night. Amanda had worn a cocktail dress to what was essentially a potluck dinner, and she'd spent the entire evening checking her phone and making comments about needing to get back to the city for a real dinner. When my colleague Martha had asked about her work, Amanda had explained event planning as if she were describing rocket science, emphasizing how demanding her clientele was and how sophisticated the events she managed were compared to small-town gatherings. "I should have seen this coming," I said, settling into my favorite armchair. "She's been freezing me out since the wedding. I just kept telling myself it would get better once the baby came." "Listen to me, Nicole Patterson." Linda's voice took on the stern tone she'd used with difficult parents during our teaching days. "You are one of the kindest, most generous women I know. You raised a wonderful son as a single mother while working full-time and taking care of your own mother during her final years. You volunteered at every school event, organized countless fundraisers, and touched the lives of hundreds of children. Don't you dare let some spoiled little princess make you feel like you're not good enough." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but they also sparked something else, a growing sense of indignation that I'd been pushing down for months. "You're right. I have been good enough. I've been more than good enough. I sacrificed everything for Ryan, and now I'm supposed to just disappear because his wife finds me embarrassing?" What are you going to do about it? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I could accept this dismissal, retreat further into my quiet life in Millbrook, and hope that eventually Amanda would allow me some small role in my grandchild's life. Or I could fight back. I don't know yet, I told Linda honestly, but I'm not going to just roll over and take this. After I hung up with Linda, I found myself pacing through my house, memories flooding back with each room I entered. The kitchen where I'd taught Ryan to cook, standing on a step stool so he could reach the counter while we made Sunday morning pancakes. The living room where we'd built countless Lego cities, and where I'd helped him with homework every single night. The hallway lined with school photos showing his gap-toothed grins, and the gradual changes as he grew from boy to man. This was the house where Ryan had recovered from chickenpox, where he'd brought his first girlfriend to meet me, where he'd called to tell me he'd gotten the job at Morrison Engineering. Every corner held pieces of our shared history, proof that I hadn't just been some peripheral figure in his life. I'd been his whole world, just as he'd been mine. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Carol Jenkins from next door. Nicole, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I couldn't help but notice you seemed upset when you came back from your walk this morning. Is everything all right? Carol was 75 and had lived next door for the past 10 years. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything, not in a nosy way, but with genuine concern for the people around her. She'd brought me soup when I had the flu last winter and had helped me carry groceries when I'd sprained my ankle. Oh, Carol, you're sweet to check on me, just some family drama. Nothing I can't handle. Well, if you need anything at all, you know where to find me. And Nicole? Sometimes family drama has a way of working itself out, but sometimes we have to help it along. There was something knowing in her voice, as if she understood more than she was letting on. After I hung up, I realized that Carol had lived through her own family challenges. Her daughter had moved to California years ago and rarely visited, but Carol had found ways to stay connected with her grandchildren despite the distance and her daughter-in-law's apparent indifference. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, empty and purposeless in a way that felt foreign. Usually, I'd be planning something for the weekend, perhaps lunch with Linda or a trip to the farmer's market. But the text message had thrown everything off balance. I felt like I was floating in some strange space between my old life, where I was Ryan's mother and soon-to-be grandmother, and some new reality where I was apparently nothing at all. I decided to take another walk, this time heading toward downtown Millbrook. The familiar sights usually comforted me. Peterson's bakery with its hand-painted sign, the old courthouse with its weathered brick facade, the park where I'd pushed Ryan on swings when he was little. But today, everything felt different, as if I was seeing my life from the outside and realizing how small it must appear to someone like Amanda. At Peterson's, I ran into Margaret Chen, who'd been the school librarian during my final years of teaching. She was coming out with a bag of their famous cinnamon rolls, her face lighting up when she saw me. Nicole, perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. How's the grandmother to be doing? You must be so excited about the baby shower coming up. The innocent question hit me like a slap. Margaret had no way of knowing that I wouldn't be attending my own grandchild's baby shower, that I'd been deliberately excluded from what should have been one of the happiest celebrations of my life. Oh yes, very excited, I managed, hoping my smile looked genuine. Amanda's mother is handling all the arrangements. How wonderful that you're all working together. There's nothing quite like becoming a grandmother, is there? All the joy of babies without the sleepless nights. Margaret laughed, completely unaware of the pain her words were causing. I'm sure you have some wonderful ideas about spoiling that little one. I mumbled something appropriately enthusiastic and escaped into the bakery, where the familiar smell of fresh bread and vanilla couldn't quite mask the bitter taste of humiliation. How many other people in town would assume I'd be at the baby shower? How many conversations would I have to navigate, pretending everything was fine while dying a little inside? Behind the counter, young Jake Peterson was arranging pastries in the display case. He'd been one of my students 15 years ago, and he always greeted me with genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson, haven't seen you in a while. How's Ryan doing? Mom heard through the grapevine that he and his wife are expecting. That's gotta be exciting for you. Another innocent question, another reminder of what I was losing. Yes, very exciting. Ryan's doing well, thank you for asking. I bet you can't wait to spoil that grandbaby rotten. My mom's already planning to be the worst grandmother influence when my sister has kids. She's got a whole list of toys that make noise. And sugar-filled treats she's going to provide behind the parents' backs. His easy laughter made my chest tight. This was what grandmotherhood was supposed to look like. Playful conspiracies and special treats, and inside jokes between generations. Instead, I was facing the possibility of being a stranger to my own grandchild. I bought a loaf of whole wheat bread I didn't need and walked home slowly, my mind churning. The problem wasn't just the baby shower, I realized. The baby shower was a symptom of something much larger, Amanda's systematic campaign to erase me from Ryan's life and ensure that her family would be the primary influence on their child. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of everything that had changed since Ryan married Amanda: the canceled Sunday dinners, the declined invitations to their house, the way conversations became stilted and formal whenever I tried to share memories of Ryan's childhood, the subtle but persistent message that my middle-class background was somehow inadequate for their new lifestyle. I thought about Amanda's parents, Robert and Patricia Westfield, with their expensive cars and designer clothes and casual mentions of their country club memberships. They represented everything Amanda wanted Ryan's life to become: sophisticated, wealthy, disconnected from anything that smacked of small-town simplicity. But I also thought about what Amanda didn't know about Ryan, what she'd never bothered to learn. She didn't know that he'd been afraid of the dark until he was 8, and that we'd solved the problem by putting glow-in-the-dark stars on his bedroom ceiling. She didn't know that he'd cried when his goldfish died in 3rd grade, and that we'd held a proper funeral in the backyard with a shoebox casket and wildflowers from the garden. She didn't know that he'd wanted to quit Little League after striking out 3 times in one game, and that I'd spent hours with him in the backyard pitching tennis balls until he regained his confidence. She didn't know that he'd struggled with math in middle school, and that we'd worked together every night at this very kitchen table until the concepts finally clicked. Amanda saw Ryan as he was now: successful, handsome, financially stable, but she had no appreciation for the thousands of small moments that had shaped him into the man she'd fallen in love with. And apparently she was determined to ensure that our grandchild would never know those stories either. The phone rang again, and this time it was my sister Janet calling from Phoenix. Janet was 5 years older than me and had always been the practical one in our family. She'd married her college sweetheart, had 3 children, and now had 6 grandchildren who adored her. "I've been thinking about you," she said without preamble. "How are the baby shower preparations going? Are you and Amanda's mother working together on the planning?" I'd been dreading this conversation. Janet had been so excited when I'd told her about the pregnancy, and she'd already started shopping for baby gifts to send from Arizona. She'd even suggested flying out for the shower if the timing worked out. "Actually, Jan, there's been a change of plans. The shower is going to be just Amanda's family." The silence on the other end was deafening. Janet had raised 3 children and dealt with various daughter-in-law dynamics over the years. She understood family politics better than most people. "Nicole, please tell me you're joking." "I wish I were. Ryan sent me a text this morning. Amanda's family only," were his exact words. "That little—" Janet caught herself before finishing the thought. "Nicole, you can't let them get away with this. This isn't just about a party. This is about your place in your grandchild's life. If you don't fight this now, it's only going to get worse." "But what can I do? If I make a fuss, they'll just use it as more evidence that I'm some kind of problem they need to manage. And if you don't make a fuss, they'll interpret your silence as acceptance." "Sweetie, I've watched you handle difficult parents, budget cuts, administrative nonsense, and everything else that comes with being a teacher for 25 years. You're not a pushover, and you shouldn't start being one now." Janet was right, and I knew it. During my teaching career, I'd faced down angry parents who thought their children could do no wrong, administrators who wanted to cut arts programs, and budget committees who didn't understand the importance of classroom supplies. I'd never back down when something important was at stake. The question is, Janet continued. What exactly do you want to happen here? Do you want to be invited to this shower? Or do you want something bigger? That was the real question, wasn't it? Did I want to fight for the right to attend one afternoon celebration? Or was this about something much more fundamental, my relationship with Ryan and my role in my grandchild's life? I want my son back, I said quietly. I want him to remember who he was before Amanda convinced him that his history was something to be ashamed of. And I want to be a real grandmother, not some distant figure who gets occasional supervised visits. Then you need a plan. And Nicole, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this is going to get ugly before it gets better. After talking to Janet, I spent the evening researching Amanda's family online. It felt a little like stalking, but I needed to understand what I was up against. Robert Westfield's investment firm had an impressive website, and Patricia's charity work was well documented in Connecticut society pages. They moved in circles where appearances mattered above all else, where reputation was currency and any hint of scandal was devastating. I also looked up Amanda's event planning company. Her website featured photographs of elaborate weddings and corporate events, all elegant and expensive, and completely impersonal. There were testimonials from satisfied clients, emphasizing Amanda's attention to detail and her ability to create unforgettable experiences for discerning clientele. The more I learned about Amanda's world, the more I understood her strategy. She wasn't just trying to exclude me from the baby shower. She was trying to rewrite Ryan's entire history. In her version of their story, Ryan was a successful engineer who'd overcome his humble beginnings to join her sophisticated family. I was an embarrassing reminder of a past she wanted to erase. But here's what Amanda didn't understand about small towns like Millbrook. We have long memories and strong loyalties. The people here had watched Ryan grow up. They remembered when he'd won the science fair in 5th grade, when he'd volunteered at the animal shelter during high school, when he'd come home from college to help me after my mother's stroke. They also remembered me, not as some provincial school teacher who wasn't good enough for her son's new life, but as the woman who'd given everything to raise a good man, while contributing to their community for decades. If Amanda wanted to play power games, she'd chosen the wrong battlefield. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I had a plan, not a complete plan perhaps, but the beginning of one, and it started with a phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Morrison Engineering, this is Sarah. Hi Sarah, this is Nicole Patterson, Ryan's mother. I was wondering if I could speak with Tom Morrison. Tom Morrison was Linda's husband, and the owner of the engineering firm where Ryan worked. He'd known Ryan since he was a teenager, and he'd been the one to offer Ryan his first job after college. If anyone could help me understand what was happening with my son, it might be Tom. Mrs. Patterson, how nice to hear from you. Let me get Tom for you right away. While I waited for Tom to come to the phone, I stared at the framed photo on my kitchen counter. Ryan at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. He'd looked so proud that day, not just of his accomplishment, but of having me there to share it. When had that pride turned to embarrassment? Nicole, good to hear from you. How are you holding up with all this baby excitement? Tom's warm voice brought me back to the present. That's actually why I'm calling, Tom. I'm a little concerned about Ryan lately. He seems different, more distant. I thought maybe you'd noticed something at work. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Tom choosing his words carefully. Well, Nicole, I don't like to get involved in personal matters, but since you're asking, Ryan has seemed more stressed lately, more focused on appearances, if you know what I mean. He used to be the kind of guy who'd work late to help a colleague, or stay after hours to mentor the new engineers. Lately, he's been more, I guess you'd say, status conscious? In what way? Little things. He's been talking about moving to a bigger house, joining the country club, sending the baby to private schools. All fine goals, I suppose, but it's like he's suddenly dissatisfied with everything that used to make him happy. And between you and me, some of his new attitudes haven't been popular with the other engineers. My heart sank. This was worse than I'd thought. Amanda wasn't just isolating Ryan from me, she was changing his fundamental character. Tom, can I ask you something in confidence? Do you think Ryan is happy? Another long pause. Nicole, That's not really my place to say, but I will tell you this. The Ryan who started working here 5 years ago was one of the most grounded, genuine young men I'd ever met. He talked about you all the time, about how proud he was of everything you'd accomplished as a single mother. The Ryan I see now, well, he's still a good engineer, but he's not the same person. Thank you for being honest with me. Nicole, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but Linda's told me a little about what's been happening with the baby preparations. If there's anything I can do to help, you just let me know. Ryan's lucky to have a mother like you, even if he's forgotten that temporarily. After talking to Tom, I felt both better and worse. Better because it confirmed that other people had noticed the changes in Ryan, that I wasn't imagining things or being overly sensitive. Worse because it meant the problem was bigger than just wedding stress or new marriage adjustments. Amanda was systematically changing who my son was. I spent the rest of the morning working in my garden, pulling weeds and deadheading flowers while my mind processed everything I'd learned. Gardening had always been my therapy, the place where I could think clearly and find perspective. As I worked among the roses Ryan had helped me plant 3 summers ago, I made my decision. I wasn't going to fight for an invitation to the baby shower. I was going to do something much more strategic and much more powerful. I was going to remind everyone in Millbrook, including Ryan, exactly who Nicole Patterson was and what I meant to this community. But first, I needed to make one more phone call. Millbrook Tribune, this is Kevin. Kevin Walsh had been the editor of our local newspaper for the past 8 years. He'd moved here from Chicago with his family, looking for a slower pace of life, and he'd done an excellent job of keeping our community informed and connected. Hi Kevin, this is Nicole Patterson. I'm calling about a story idea. Mrs. Patterson, always good to hear from you. What did you have in mind? I was thinking about doing a feature on multi-generational families in Millbrook. You know, the importance of grandparents in children's lives, how family traditions get passed down, that sort of thing. I think it would be particularly timely with all the young families moving into the Willowbrook development. That sounds like a great idea. Were you thinking of writing it yourself, or did you want me to assign it to one of our freelancers? Actually, I was hoping I could be interviewed for it. As someone who's about to become a grandmother myself, I have some thoughts about the changing dynamics of family relationships. Perfect. When would you like to do the interview? How about next week? That should give me time to organize my thoughts. Sounds great. And Mrs. Patterson? Congratulations on the upcoming grandchild. You must be over the moon. I certainly am, Kevin. This baby is going to be very lucky to have so many people who love them. As I hung up the phone, I felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over me. For 25 years, I'd been a teacher, and the best teachers know that sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught directly. Sometimes you have to create situations where people discover the truth for themselves. Amanda wanted to play games with my relationship with Ryan? Fine. But she was about to learn that games could be played by both sides, and I'd had a lot more practice at understanding people and building communities than she'd ever had. The baby shower was just the beginning. What came next would determine whether I remained a part of my grandchild's life, or whether I disappeared into the background like Amanda clearly hoped I would. But one thing was certain, I wasn't disappearing without a fight. The baby shower was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I knew this because Linda had overheard Amanda discussing the details at the post office, speaking loudly enough for half the town to hear about the intimate family gathering she was hosting. By Friday evening, I'd made my decision about how to handle the situation, and it wasn't what anyone expected. I spent Friday night preparing for what would either be the most empowering moment of my life or the most humiliating. I pressed my best navy dress, the one I'd worn to Ryan's college graduation, and laid out my pearl necklace, the one my mother had given me when I started teaching. I polished my good shoes and set my hair in rollers, just like I used to do for parent-teacher conferences, when I needed to project authority and competence. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed to mock the turmoil in my heart. I had my usual coffee and toast, watered my garden, and tried to act like it was any other Saturday. But my hands shook as I applied my lipstick, and I had to redo my mascara twice because my eyes kept tearing up. At 1:30, I loaded my car with everything I'd prepared over the past few days. The hand-knitted baby blanket I'd been working on for months, soft yellow with tiny white roses around the border. A photo album I'd put together chronicling Ryan's life from birth to his wedding day, complete with handwritten captions explaining each memory. A rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother, the one Ryan had been rocked to sleep in as a baby, which I'd had refinished and cushioned in pale green fabric. But most importantly, I had a manila folder containing copies of every letter Ryan had ever written me from summer camp, every report card, every school project he'd been proud of, and dozens of photos that told the real story of who he was before Amanda decided to rewrite his history. I drove slowly through Millbrook's familiar streets, past Peterson's bakery where Jake waved from behind the counter, past the elementary school where I'd spent the best years of my career, past the park where I'd pushed Ryan on swings and taught him to ride a bicycle. Each landmark felt like a goodbye, though I wasn't entirely sure to what. The Willowbrook subdivision always made me feel like I was entering a different world. The houses were enormous and identical, with perfect lawns and circular driveways and not a single toy or garden tool left carelessly in a yard. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where every family tried to outdo their neighbors in displays of prosperity. Ryan and Amanda's house sat at the end of Maple Ridge Court, a sprawling colonial with white columns and black shutters that screamed expensive good taste. The driveway was already full of luxury cars: BMW sedans, Mercedes SUVs, a Lexus with Connecticut plates that had to belong to Amanda's parents. I parked on the street and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around inside. Women in designer dresses holding champagne glasses, men in golf shirts clustered near what I assumed was a bar setup. Everything looked elegant and coordinated, like something from a magazine spread about perfect family gatherings. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one more time, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. The rocking chair was too heavy for me to carry alone, so I left it for last and started with the photo album and blanket. My heart pounded as I walked up the brick pathway, past the professionally landscaped flower beds that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. The front door was solid oak with stained glass panels, and I could hear laughter and conversation from inside. I rang the doorbell and waited, clutching my gifts and trying to project the same confidence I'd used when facing difficult parents during my teaching career. Amanda answered the door, and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. She was wearing a pale pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. For a moment, she just stared at me. "Nicole," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "what are you doing here?" "I came to celebrate my grandchild," I replied calmly, stepping forward as if I expected to be invited in. "I brought some gifts." "But I thought Ryan explained, this is just family. My family." "I am family, Amanda. I'm Ryan's mother and this baby's grandmother. I've been part of this family for 31 years, long before you arrived." Behind Amanda, I could see the party in full swing. The living room had been transformed with pink and white decorations, elegant floral arrangements, and a dessert table that looked like something from a high-end catering company. Women in expensive dresses clustered around gift tables laden with beautifully wrapped packages, while men stood near French doors that opened onto a perfectly manicured backyard. Amanda's mother appeared at her daughter's side, tall and impeccably dressed with the kind of silver hair that came from expensive salons. Patricia Westfield looked at me with barely concealed disdain, taking in my off-the-rack dress and modest jewelry with a glance that made me feel like I was applying for a job I'd never qualify for. "Nicole," Patricia said in a voice that could have frozen water. "How unexpected. I'm afraid this is rather an awkward situation." "Why is it awkward?" I asked, still maintaining my calm tone. "I'm here to celebrate my grandchild with my family." "Your family?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. This is Amanda's baby shower, for Amanda's baby." The guest list was very carefully planned, and apparently I wasn't considered important enough to be included. The conversation was taking place in the doorway, but voices carry, and I could see people inside starting to take notice. A few women had turned to stare, their champagne glasses paused halfway to their lips. The men by the bar had stopped talking and were glancing in our direction. Amanda looked mortified, clearly realizing that whatever scene was about to unfold would happen in front of her carefully curated guest list. Maybe we should discuss this privately, she said, reaching for the door as if to close it behind her. No, I said firmly, raising my voice just enough to be heard. I think this conversation needs to happen right here, right now, in front of everyone. Nicole, please, Amanda's voice took on a pleading tone. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene. I looked at her with genuine surprise. Amanda, you excluded your husband's mother from their child's baby shower. You sent a text message disinviting me from one of the most important celebrations of my grandchild's life. And you think I'm the one making a scene? By now, the entire party had gone quiet. I could see Ryan standing near the fireplace, his face pale and his expression frozen somewhere between embarrassment and panic. He was wearing a light blue shirt I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago, though I doubted he remembered where it came from. Ryan, I called to him across the room, could you come here, please? I think we need to have a conversation. He approached slowly, like a man walking to his execution. When he reached the doorway, he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Mom, what are you doing here? I'm here because I'm your mother, and this is my grandchild we're celebrating. Or at least, I thought we were celebrating together. But I explained in my text. You sent me a text message, Ryan. A text message dismissing me from my own grandchild's life like I was some casual acquaintance you could easily discard. The words hung in the air, and I could see people inside whispering to each other. Some of Amanda's friends looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to be enjoying the drama. Patricia Westfield looked like she wanted to call security. It's not like that, Mom. It's just that Amanda's mother wanted to handle the shower, and with limited space. Limited space? I looked past him at the enormous living room, easily large enough for 50 people. Ryan, there are maybe 20 people here. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was about space. Amanda stepped forward, her composure cracking slightly. Nicole, I tried to be diplomatic about this, but since you're forcing the issue, let me be direct. This shower is for people who will actually be involved in this baby's life. People who understand our lifestyle and our values. And I don't understand your values? Frankly, no. You live in a tiny house in a town that's barely on the map. You drive a 10-year-old car and shop at discount stores. When Ryan and I take this baby to our country club or on family vacations, what exactly would you contribute to those experiences? The words hit me like physical blows, but I'd been expecting something like this. Amanda was finally showing her true colors in front of everyone, and that was exactly what I'd hoped would happen. You want to know what I'd contribute? I looked directly at Ryan, ignoring Amanda completely. I'd contribute the story of the night you were born, when the power went out during a thunderstorm, and I held you by candlelight while we waited for the electricity to come back on. I'd contribute the memory of teaching you to tie your shoes, sitting on the kitchen floor for hours until you finally got it right, and jumped up and down with excitement. Ryan's face was getting redder by the minute, and I could see some of the guests leaning forward to hear better. I'd contribute the story of your first day of school, when you were so nervous you threw up on my shoes, and I carried you into the building anyway and stayed with you until you felt safe. I'd contribute the nights I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for your Little League uniform, and the weekends I spent driving you to tournaments in towns 2 hours away because you loved baseball so much. Mom, please stop, Ryan said quietly, but I was just getting started. I'd contribute the memory of you at 8 years old, crying because Tommy Mitchell said you didn't have a real family since your dad left, and how we spent that whole evening making a scrapbook of all our adventures together to prove that families come in all shapes and sizes. I'd contribute the pride I felt when you won the science fair in 5th grade, and the way you hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Amanda's face was getting darker with each word, but Patricia Westfield looked like she was watching a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. I'd contribute the story of your first heartbreak, when Jessica Murphy broke up with you before junior prom, and how we went out for ice cream instead and you told me I was the best date you'd ever had. I'd contribute the memory of your high school graduation, when you thanked me in your speech for showing you that strength comes from perseverance, not privilege. By now, several of the guests were crying, and even some of Amanda's friends looked moved by my words. But Amanda herself looked furious. "Those are lovely memories, Nicole," she said with icy control, "but they're the past. We're focused on our child's future, and that future doesn't include—" "Doesn't include what?" I interrupted. "Doesn't include love. Doesn't include stories. Doesn't include knowing where they come from. It doesn't include poverty and small-minded thinking and limitation," Amanda snapped, finally losing her composure completely. "I don't want my child growing up thinking that living in some tiny town and working some ordinary job is acceptable. I want them to have standards, ambition, class." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Patricia Westfield looked uncomfortable with her daughter's outburst. Several guests were staring at Amanda with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. "So let me understand this correctly," I said in my calmest teacher voice. "You think that raising a child to be kind, hardworking, and grateful represents a lack of class? You think that teaching them to value relationships over possessions shows a lack of ambition? I think," Amanda said, her voice shaking with anger, "that my child deserves better than your middle-class mediocrity." That's when Ryan finally found his voice. "Amanda, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," she shot back. "Your mother needs to understand her place in our family, which is essentially nowhere. She's an embarrassment, Ryan. Look at her clothes. Look at her house. Look at her entire life. Is that really what you want associated with our child?" The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, but it was also exactly what I'd hoped to provoke. Because now everyone could see who Amanda really was beneath the polished exterior, and more importantly, Ryan could see how she really felt about the woman who'd raised him. "You know what's embarrassing, Amanda?" I said quietly. "What's embarrassing is having so little confidence in your own worth that you need to tear down other people to feel superior. What's embarrassing is thinking that money and status are more important than love and loyalty." I turned to address the room full of guests, many of whom were now openly staring at Amanda with disapproval. "I want you all to know something about my son Ryan. He learned to cook in my tiny kitchen, standing on a step stool so he could reach the counter. He learned about responsibility by taking care of our neighbor's elderly dog when she went into the hospital. He learned about generosity by helping me deliver Christmas baskets to families who were struggling." Several people nodded, and I could see Amanda's face growing paler as she realized how badly this was going for her. "He learned about perseverance by watching me work 3 jobs to keep us afloat after his father left. He learned about education by seeing me go back to school at night to get my teaching degree while working full-time. He learned about community by watching me volunteer at his school, at our church, at the food bank." Ryan was staring at the floor now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Most importantly, he learned about unconditional love by having a mother who supported his dreams even when they were different from mine, who celebrated his successes even when they took him far from home, and who loved him enough to let him make his own choices even when those choices broke her heart." I turned back to Amanda, who looked like she wanted to disappear. "You want to know the difference between your family and mine, Amanda? Your family loves Ryan because of what he can provide: status, success, the right kind of connections. I love him because of who he is, flaws and all. And I'll love this baby the same way, regardless of whether you think I'm good enough to be in their life." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Then Patricia Westfield cleared her throat. "Perhaps," she said stiffly, "this conversation would be better continued in private." "No," I said firmly, "this conversation needed to happen exactly where it happened, in front of everyone, because now there's no ambiguity about what's really going on here." I looked at Ryan one more time. "Son, I've spent 31 years showing you what real love looks like. I've sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own happiness, to give you every opportunity I could. I've never asked for anything in return, except to be treated with basic respect and to have a place in your life." My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed on. "If you choose to stand there and let your wife treat me like I'm some kind of embarrassment to be hidden away, then you've learned nothing from the woman who raised you. And that breaks my heart more than you'll ever know." Ryan finally looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt or scared. But then Amanda grabbed his arm, and the moment passed. "I think you should leave," Amanda said coldly. "You've done enough damage for one day." "You're right," I replied, surprising everyone. "I should leave, but not because you're telling me to." I walked back to my car and retrieved the rocking chair, struggling with its weight, but determined to make this final gesture. Several guests had followed me outside, watching as I carried it up the walkway. "This belonged to my grandmother," I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Ryan was rocked to sleep in this chair every night for the first 2 years of his life. I had it refinished for my grandchild, hoping they might experience the same comfort and love. I set the chair down on the front porch, right next to the door where everyone would have to see it. Since I'm apparently not welcome at this celebration, I'll leave my gifts here. The blanket I knitted during every free moment for the past 6 months. The photo album showing Ryan's real history before Amanda decided it was too embarrassing to acknowledge. And this chair, which represents 4 generations of women who understood that love is more important than status. I straightened up and looked at the crowd that had gathered on the porch and lawn. Some of Amanda's friends looked ashamed, while others seemed to be reevaluating everything they thought they knew about this family. "To those of you who are real friends," I said, "I hope you'll remember this moment the next time someone tries to convince you that people are disposable just because they don't fit a certain image." I walked back to my car with as much dignity as I could muster, got in, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see people still standing on the lawn, talking in small groups and gesturing toward the house. Whatever celebration Amanda had planned was effectively over. The drive home felt both endless and too short. Part of me was exhilarated by finally standing up for myself, by refusing to be dismissed and diminished. But part of me was devastated by the realization that my relationship with Ryan might be permanently damaged. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Linda waiting on my front porch with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues. News traveled fast in Millbrook, and apparently someone had already called her about the scene at the baby shower. "How bad was it?" she asked as I walked up the steps. "It was either the best thing I've ever done or the worst," I replied honestly. "Probably both." We went inside, and Linda opened the wine while I changed out of my good dress and into comfortable clothes. As I told her everything that had happened, I realized that despite the pain and uncertainty, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Ryan had married Amanda, I'd been completely honest about how I felt and what I needed. I'd refused to be erased from my son's history, or excluded from my grandchild's future without a fight. Whether that fight would ultimately succeed or fail remained to be seen, but at least I'd fought it with dignity and truth. The phone started ringing around 6 o'clock. Neighbors who'd heard about the confrontation, former colleagues who'd received secondhand accounts, even some parents of my former students who wanted to express their support. Word of what had happened at the baby shower was spreading through Millbrook like wildfire, and the response was overwhelmingly supportive. But the one call I wanted most from Ryan never came. The first sign that my confrontation at the baby shower had consequences beyond what I'd anticipated came Sunday evening when my phone rang. It was Carol Jenkins from next door, and her voice was tight with concern. "Nicole, dear, I think you should know that there's been some talk around town about what happened yesterday. Not bad talk, mind you, but people are certainly talking. I'd spent most of Sunday in my garden, trying to process everything that had occurred and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The confrontation with Amanda had felt necessary in the moment, but in the quiet aftermath, I was beginning to question whether I'd handled things the right way." "What kind of talk, Carol?" "Well, Margaret Chen called me this morning after she ran into Patricia Morrison at the grocery store. Apparently, Linda heard from someone who was at the shower that you gave quite a speech. People are saying you really put that daughter-in-law of yours in her place." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. The last thing I'd wanted was to become the subject of town gossip, even if the gossip was sympathetic. "I'm afraid I may have lost my temper," I admitted. "From what I heard, you lost your temper magnificently. But Nicole, honey, you should also know that Amanda's been making some calls of her own." Someone heard her talking to her mother-in-law about how you ambushed them at a private family gathering. My stomach dropped. What kind of calls? I'm not entirely sure, but Mary Peterson mentioned that someone came into the bakery asking questions about you. Not hostile questions, mind you, but inquiries about what kind of person you are, whether you've ever caused problems in town before. This was worse than I'd feared. It was one thing to have a family argument, but if Amanda was actively trying to damage my reputation in Millbrook, that was something else entirely. Carol, I appreciate you letting me know. I suppose I should have expected something like this. Oh, don't you worry about that. Anyone who knows you knows exactly what kind of person you are. But I thought you should be prepared, just in case. After Carol hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My garden looked particularly beautiful in the evening light, the result of years of careful tending and patient cultivation. It struck me that relationships were similar to gardens. They required consistent care, attention, and sometimes difficult decisions about what to nurture and what to prune away. Monday morning brought a call from Linda, and her voice was more animated than I'd heard it in weeks. Nicole, you're not going to believe what happened at the school board meeting last night. I wasn't aware there was a school board meeting. Emergency session to discuss the budget shortfall. But that's not the important part. The important part is that 3 different board members mentioned you during the public comment section. They mentioned me? Why? Because apparently word has gotten around about what happened at the baby shower, and people are rallying to your defense. Sarah Matthews stood up and talked about how you'd been her daughter's favorite teacher and how you'd gone above and beyond to help struggling students. Then Jim Walsh mentioned how you'd organized the food drive that helped his family when he was out of work. And finally, Dr. Peterson, Jake's dad, talked about your years of volunteer work and how you'd been one of the most dedicated community members he'd ever known. I felt tears prick my eyes. That's very kind of them, but I hope this doesn't turn into some kind of public drama. Nicole, listen to me. This isn't drama. This is your community, standing up for you. People are genuinely upset that someone would treat you the way Amanda did, and they want you to know you have their support. What about Ryan? Have you heard anything from him? Linda's voice softened. Nothing directly, but Tom mentioned that Ryan called in sick today, which isn't like him. I think he's probably trying to figure out how to handle all of this. The rest of Monday passed quietly, but Tuesday brought a surprise visitor. I was watering my roses when a sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. My heart jumped, thinking it might be Ryan, but instead, Patricia Westfield emerged from the driver's seat, dressed in an expensive navy suit and wearing an expression that could have curdled milk. I set down my watering can and walked to meet her at the front gate, trying to project calm confidence, despite the fact that my hands were shaking slightly. "Patricia," I said evenly, "this is unexpected." "Nicole." Her voice was as cold as I remembered from the baby shower. "I think we need to have a conversation." I considered inviting her inside, then decided I'd rather have this conversation on neutral ground. "Would you like to sit on the porch? I can bring us some iced tea." "This won't take long," she replied, making no move toward the chairs I'd indicated. I wanted to discuss the unfortunate incident at Amanda's baby shower. Unfortunate incident? Is that what we're calling it? Patricia's lips tightened. "I'm calling it an unprovoked attack on my daughter during what should have been a joyful family celebration." "What would you call it?" "I'd call it a mother standing up for her right to be part of her grandchild's life," I replied calmly. "But I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree on that." "The thing is, Nicole, we don't have to disagree on anything, because this situation is going to be resolved one way or another. Amanda is Ryan's wife, and she has every right to decide who she wants in her child's life. And Ryan is my son, which gives me rights as well." Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually, you're wrong about that. Ryan is a grown man who's made his choice about the kind of life he wants to live. If that life doesn't include weekly visits to a small-town house and homemade casseroles, that's his decision to make." Her words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "Is that what you came here to tell me? That my son has chosen his wife's family over his mother?" "I came to tell you that if you continue to make waves, if you keep showing up where you're not wanted and causing scenes, There will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Patricia's smile grew wider and more unpleasant. Did you know that Amanda has been documenting your behavior? The unexpected visits to their home, the phone calls at inappropriate times, the way you've been pressuring Ryan to choose between his wife and his mother. It paints a rather concerning picture of a woman who can't accept that her son has moved on with his life. I felt ice form in my stomach. Are you threatening me? I'm simply pointing out that there are legal remedies for harassment and stalking, even when it's done by family members. Amanda has friends who are attorneys, and if you continue to disrupt their lives, they'll be happy to help her explore her options. The casualness with which she delivered this threat was almost more frightening than the threat itself. This woman was used to getting her way, and she clearly saw me as an obstacle to be removed. Patricia, I said quietly, I raised Ryan from the day he was born. I worked 3 jobs to pay for his education, sacrificed my own dreams to make sure he had every opportunity. I supported him through every challenge and celebrated every success. I am not some crazy woman who's stalking your daughter. I'm a mother who wants to be part of her grandchild's life. And you will be, in whatever capacity Amanda deems appropriate. But you need to understand that the days of you being a central figure in Ryan's life are over. He has a new family now with new priorities, and you're going to have to accept that. And if I don't? Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, much like the one I'd taken to the baby shower. Then you'll be dealing with restraining orders, harassment charges, and a very public legal battle that I guarantee you don't have the resources to win. She handed me the folder, and I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photocopies of text messages between Ryan and Amanda, with certain passages highlighted in yellow. My heart sank as I read comments about Mom being too clingy and needing space from the constant guilt trips. There were also photos of my house taken from the street, with notes about my frequent unannounced visits to their home. This is all taken out of context, I said, though my voice sounded weak even to myself. Context is whatever a judge decides it is, Patricia replied. And I think you'll find that judges tend to be sympathetic to young couples who are being harassed by overbearing in-laws. I closed the folder and handed it back to her. So what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you step back gracefully, send birthday cards, attend major holidays if invited, be the pleasant but distant grandmother who knows her place. In return, Amanda will make sure you have some contact with the baby, supervised visits perhaps, or family gatherings where you can see the child. Supervised visits? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. You're talking about my own grandchild like I'm some kind of dangerous stranger. You're talking about Amanda's child like you have some inherent right to unlimited access. You don't. The sooner you accept that reality, the easier this will be for everyone. I looked at this woman who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd never stayed up all night with a sick child or worried about how to pay for school clothes, and I felt a flash of the same anger that had propelled me to the baby shower. Let me ask you something, Patricia. When Ryan was 8 years old and afraid of the dark, did Amanda comfort him? When he broke his arm falling off his bicycle, did she drive him to the emergency room? When he was struggling with fractions in 4th grade, did she sit at the kitchen table with him every night until he understood? Patricia's expression didn't change. That was then. This is now. No, I said firmly. That was the foundation of who he became. Those moments, those experiences, that love, it doesn't just disappear because Amanda finds it inconvenient. It does if Ryan chooses to let it disappear. And from what I can see, he's already making that choice. Her words hit me like a physical blow because I was afraid they might be true. Ryan hadn't called since the baby shower, hadn't responded to the message I'd left on his voicemail, hadn't made any attempt to bridge the gap between us. I think this conversation is over, I said, turning toward my house. Nicole, Patricia called after me, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You can be part of this child's life, just not on your terms. I paused at my front door but didn't turn around. And what exactly are your terms? Twice-a-year visits, maybe Christmas and the child's birthday. Phone calls scheduled in advance and kept brief. No dropping by their house unannounced, no pressuring Ryan to choose between his family loyalties, and absolutely no more public scenes like the one at the baby shower. And if I don't agree, then you'll have no contact at all. And given what Amanda can document about your behavior, that outcome won't be hard to enforce legally. I went inside without responding and watched from my living room window as Patricia returned to her car and drove away. The folder she'd shown me haunted my thoughts for the rest of the day. Had I really been as intrusive as those text messages suggested? Had my attempts to maintain a relationship with Ryan been perceived as harassment? That evening, I called Janet in Phoenix, needing to talk to someone who would give me an honest perspective. "She's trying to intimidate you," Janet said after I'd told her about Patricia's visit. "This is a classic power play. Isolate you from Ryan, make you doubt your own perceptions, and then offer you scraps of contact in exchange for your compliance." But what if she's right? What if I have been too pushy, too demanding? "Nicole, you've called your son maybe twice a month, and visited their house maybe once every 6 weeks. That's not harassment. That's normal family contact." The fact that Amanda considers it excessive says more about her than it does about you. But those text messages were private conversations between a husband and wife where they were probably venting their frustrations. Of course they were going to paint you in the worst possible light. That doesn't make them accurate descriptions of your behavior. Janet was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Sweetie, I want you to think about something. If Amanda's case against you was really that strong, would Patricia have needed to come to your house to threaten you? If they really had grounds for a restraining order, wouldn't they have just filed for one instead of trying to negotiate?" She was right, and I felt some of my panic begin to subside. So what should I do? You should document everything. Write down exactly what Patricia said, when she said it, and what evidence she claimed to have. Keep records of every attempt you make to contact Ryan and how he responds. And Nicole, don't you dare let them bully you into accepting less than you deserve. Wednesday morning brought another surprise, this time a pleasant one. I was having my usual coffee when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I saw Tom Morrison walking up my front path, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought something might have happened to Ryan. I opened the door before he could knock. "Tom? Is everything all right? Is Ryan?" "Ryan's fine, physically," Tom said, his expression grim. "But I wanted to talk to you about what's been happening at work." I invited him in and poured him a cup of coffee, my hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline surge. "Nicole, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you need to know what you're dealing with. Ryan has been acting strangely since the weekend. He's distracted, he's making mistakes he wouldn't normally make, and yesterday he got into an argument with one of our senior engineers over something completely trivial." "Do you think it's related to what happened at the baby shower?" Tom nodded. "I'm sure of it. But here's the thing. I don't think he's angry at you. I think he's angry at himself." "What do you mean?" I think he knows he handled the situation badly, and he's struggling with what to do about it. Yesterday, I overheard him on the phone with Amanda, and it sounded like they were having a pretty heated discussion about family obligations and respect. A spark of hope flickered in my chest. "Really?" "Nicole, I've known Ryan since he was a college intern. He's a good kid with a strong moral compass, but he's also young and in love and probably scared of losing his wife. Sometimes people make poor decisions when they're caught between competing loyalties. So what are you suggesting I do?" Tom leaned forward in his chair. "I'm suggesting you give him some time to work through this on his own. Don't call him, don't show up at his house, don't give Amanda any ammunition to use against you. Let him come to his own conclusions about what kind of man he wants to be. But what if he doesn't? What if he chooses Amanda's version of the family over mine? Then at least you'll know you handled yourself with dignity. But Nicole, I really don't think that's going to happen. I think Ryan is realizing that he can't build a happy life on a foundation that requires him to reject the woman who raised him." After Tom left, I spent the day thinking about his advice. It went against every instinct I had as a mother to step back and let Ryan figure things out on his own, but I could see the wisdom in it. If I kept pushing, I'd only prove Amanda's point about me being intrusive and demanding. Thursday brought yet another unexpected visitor, this time Jake Peterson from the bakery, carrying a white box tied with string. "Mrs. Patterson." I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I brought you some of those cinnamon rolls you like. Jake, that's so sweet of you, but you didn't need to make a special trip. Actually, I kind of did. My dad wanted me to give you a message. He said to tell you that the whole Peterson family is behind you, and if you need anything at all, we want you to call us. I felt tears prick my eyes. The kindness of this young man, whom I taught to read when he was 6 years old, was almost overwhelming. There's something else, Jake continued, looking slightly uncomfortable. Some lady came into the bakery yesterday, asking questions about you. Real fancy lady, expensive clothes, not from around here. What kind of questions? She wanted to know if you'd ever caused trouble in town, if you had a reputation for being difficult or unstable. Dad told her that you were one of the most respected people in Millbrook, and that anyone who said otherwise didn't know what they were talking about. I sighed. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Jake. I'm afraid I've gotten myself into a bit of family drama. Mrs. Patterson, you don't need to apologize for anything. That lady didn't like Dad's answers, so she tried to suggest that maybe you'd been acting strangely lately, maybe showing signs of, mental problems that come with age. My stomach clenched. This was worse than I'd thought. Amanda wasn't just trying to paint me as intrusive, she was trying to paint me as mentally unstable. Dad got pretty mad at that point. Jake continued. He told her that you were sharp as a tack, and that anyone who thought differently was welcome to test her math skills against theirs. Then he asked her to leave. Your father is a good man. He is. And Mrs. Patterson? He wanted me to tell you that if anyone else comes around asking questions like that, they're going to get the same response from every business owner in town. After Jake left, I sat at my kitchen table with the box of cinnamon rolls and thought about what Amanda was trying to do. She wasn't just trying to limit my contact with Ryan and the baby. She was trying to destroy my reputation in my own community, to isolate me so completely that I'd have no choice but to accept whatever scraps of relationship she was willing to offer. But she'd underestimated the bonds I'd built over 43 years in Millbrook. She'd underestimated the loyalty of people who'd known me since I was a young teacher trying to make a difference. And most importantly, she'd underestimated the strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. Friday evening brought the call I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Ryan's name appeared on my caller ID, and I stared at the phone for several rings before finding the courage to answer. Hello, Ryan. Mom! His voice sounded tired and strained. Can we talk? Of course. Do you want to come over, or would you prefer to meet somewhere? I'll come to the house. I need to see you in person. He arrived an hour later, looking haggard and older than his 31 years. He sat heavily in the living room chair he'd claimed as his own during high school, the one position to get the best view of the television during football games. For several minutes we just looked at each other. Finally Ryan spoke. Mom, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. Yes, I do. I should never have let Amanda send that text message, excluding you from the baby shower. And I definitely should never have stood there and let her talk to you the way she did. Relief flooded through me, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. What changed your mind? Ryan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was struggling with a difficult problem. A lot of things. The way people at work have been looking at me this week, like they're disappointed in me. The fact that Tom Morrison, a man I respect more than almost anyone, could barely make eye contact with me. But mostly it was something Amanda said yesterday. What did she say? She said that now that we'd handled the situation with you, we could focus on building our real family. The way she said real family? Like you were some kind of pretender who'd been interfering with our lives. Ryan's voice cracked. Mom, you are my real family. You're the one who raised me, who sacrificed for me, who loved me unconditionally. And I let her make me forget that. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. Oh, Ryan. I know I can't undo what happened at the baby shower, and I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix everything. But I need you to know that I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm ashamed of how I acted. What does this mean for us going forward? What about Amanda? Ryan's face darkened. Amanda and I are having some serious conversations about respect and family priorities. She's not happy that I'm here tonight, but I told her that my relationship with my mother is not negotiable. I don't want to come between you and your wife. "You're not coming between us, Mom. You're my family, and she needs to accept that. If she can't, then we have bigger problems than I thought." We talked for 2 more hours, and slowly, carefully we began to rebuild the bridge that had been damaged by months of misunderstanding and manipulation. Ryan told me about the pressure he'd been under from Amanda to upgrade his life, to distance himself from anything that reminded her of his middle-class background. I told him about Patricia's visit and the intimidation tactics they'd been using. By the time he left, we'd agreed on some ground rules for moving forward. I would be involved in my grandchild's life in a meaningful way, not just as a distant figure who sent birthday cards. Amanda would need to treat me with basic respect, and Ryan would not allow anyone, including his wife, to disparage the woman who'd raised him. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew Amanda wouldn't give up her campaign to minimize my role without a fight, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back, and that was worth whatever battles lay ahead. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for the first time in over a year. The familiar routine of peeling potatoes and seasoning the roast brought back memories of countless meals shared with Ryan throughout his childhood. But today was different. Today, Amanda would be joining us. The reconciliation hadn't happened overnight. After Ryan's visit and his promise to set boundaries with his wife, there had been weeks of tense negotiations, awkward phone calls, and careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Amanda had initially resisted any attempt at reconciliation, insisting that I had humiliated her in front of her friends and family. But something had shifted when the baby came. Little Emma Rose arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in September, 6 weeks after my confrontation with Ryan. I wasn't at the hospital. That privilege still belonged exclusively to Amanda's family, but Ryan called me from the parking lot, his voice thick with emotion as he described his daughter's tiny fingers and perfect features. "Mom, she's beautiful," he whispered. "She has your nose, I think, and the darkest hair. I wish you could see her." The longing in his voice broke my heart, but I kept my tone steady. "I'll see her when the time is right, sweetheart. Just focus on being present for Amanda and the baby right now." What I didn't know was that Amanda's recovery had been complicated. An emergency cesarean section followed by an infection had left her weak and overwhelmed. Her mother, Patricia, had flown in from Connecticut to help, but her version of help involved hiring a series of expensive nannies and criticizing everything from the hospital's substandard accommodations to Amanda's difficulty breastfeeding. Ryan later told me that it was during those first difficult weeks that Amanda began to see the difference between real support and the performative kind she was used to. While Patricia fussed about the appearance of things and complained about the inconvenience of staying in a, quote, provincial town like Millbrook, the actual work of caring for Amanda and the baby fell to Ryan, who was trying to balance new fatherhood with his demanding job. The turning point came when Linda Morrison, Tom's wife and my longtime friend, showed up at their door with a week's worth of homemade meals. She didn't ask permission or wait for an invitation. She simply arrived with containers of soup, casseroles, and fresh bread, along with practical advice about feeding schedules and sleeping patterns. "Your mother-in-law would have been here herself," Linda told Amanda gently, "but she's respecting your wishes about space. She wanted you to know she's thinking of you, and that these are some of Ryan's favorite comfort foods from when he was growing up." For the first time since the baby shower confrontation, Amanda cried. Not from frustration or exhaustion, but from genuine emotion at this unexpected kindness. She realized that while her own mother's help came with conditions and criticisms, the support from my circle of friends was offered freely, without judgment or strings attached. The next week, Amanda called me herself. "Nicole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was wondering if you'd like to meet Emma." I drove to their house with shaking hands, carrying a simple gift, a soft pink blanket I'd knitted during the long weeks of waiting. When Amanda opened the door, she looked fragile and exhausted, but there was something different in her eyes. Something that might have been respect. "She's sleeping right now," Amanda said, leading me to the nursery. "But you can peek at her." I stood beside the crib and looked down at my granddaughter, this perfect little person who represented hope for the future of our fractured family. She was indeed beautiful, with Ryan's dark hair and delicate features that reminded me of Ryan as a baby. "She looks like him," I whispered. "Everyone says that," Amanda replied. "But when she smiles, I see something else. Something that might be you." That afternoon, we had our first real conversation. Amanda told me about her difficult recovery, her struggles with motherhood, and her growing realization that raising a child required more than money and good intentions. I shared stories about Ryan's infancy, practical advice about sleepless nights, and reassurance that feeling overwhelmed was normal for any new mother. When Ryan came home from work and found us sitting together in the living room, his face showed a relief so profound that I knew our family had a chance to heal. The road to this Sunday dinner had been gradual. First, there were brief visits to see Emma, always carefully scheduled and limited in duration. Then longer conversations between Amanda and me, where we slowly began to understand each other's perspectives. Amanda admitted that she'd felt threatened by my relationship with Ryan, worried that she could never compete with the bond between a mother and son who'd been through so much together. I acknowledged that I'd sometimes held on to Ryan too tightly, scared of losing the person who'd been the center of my world for so long. We both recognized that our conflict had been as much about our own insecurities as it was about any real incompatibility. The invitation to Sunday dinner had come from Amanda herself, delivered hesitantly but sincerely. "I know I can't undo what happened at the baby shower," she'd said during one of our visits. "But I'd like to try to make things right. Would you consider having dinner with us? I thought maybe you could share some of those stories about Ryan's childhood that I'd like Emma to know someday." Now, as I put the finishing touches on the meal, I reflected on how much had changed. My relationship with Ryan was stronger than it had been in years, built on a foundation of honesty rather than obligation. Amanda and I weren't friends exactly, but we'd found a way to respect each other as women who both loved Ryan and wanted what was best for Emma. The doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. Ryan stood on my porch holding Emma in her carrier, while Amanda beside him clutched a bouquet of flowers from their garden. "These are from our rose bush," she said, offering me the flowers. "The one we planted last spring. I thought you might like them." "They're beautiful," I replied, and I meant it. The roses were the same deep pink as the ones in my own garden, and I realized Amanda had chosen them deliberately, as a symbol of common ground. Dinner was a revelation. Amanda asked thoughtful questions about Ryan's childhood, laughing at stories about his obsession with dinosaurs and his disastrous attempt to build a treehouse. Ryan shared memories I'd almost forgotten, like the time I'd stayed up all night helping him finish a diorama of ancient Egypt the night before it was due. When Emma woke up and began to fuss, Amanda automatically handed her to me. As I held my granddaughter for the first time in my own home, I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced in months. "She likes you," Amanda observed as Emma settled contentedly in my arms. "She likes the rocking motion," I replied. "I used to rock Ryan like this when he was colicky. Would you like me to show you the technique?" For the next hour, I taught Amanda the gentle swaying motion that had comforted her husband 31 years earlier. As we worked together to soothe Emma, I saw a glimpse of the grandmother I could become. Not the overwhelming presence Amanda had feared, but a supportive figure who could offer wisdom without judgment. After they left, I sat in my garden as the sun set, reflecting on the day's events. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan. "Thank you for today, Mom. Emma's lucky to have you as her grandmother. We all are." A few minutes later, another message arrived, this one from Amanda. "Thank you for the stories and the rocking tip. I'd like Emma to hear more about her daddy's childhood. Maybe next Sunday." I smiled as I typed my response. "I'd love that. I have 31 years of stories to share." As I looked around my garden, at the roses that had survived harsh winters and bloomed more beautifully each spring, I thought about resilience and second chances. Some relationships, like some plants, needed to be completely uprooted and replanted in better soil. Others just needed careful pruning and patient tending. My relationship with Ryan and Amanda might never be perfect, but it was real now, built on honest communication rather than resentment and misunderstanding. Emma would grow up knowing all her grandparents, hearing stories from both sides of her family, and understanding that love comes in many forms. The woman who'd driven to that baby shower 3 months ago, determined to fight for her place in her grandchild's life, had succeeded in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that leave everyone feeling like they've won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.